got a bit of a breaking line here from Stephen Swinford, the Times' political editor, who's given an update on that cabinet briefing this evening. And Stephen Swinford says Britain expected to join US in carrying airstrikes out on Houthi military positions in Yemen tonight, says Stephen Swinford. Rishi Sunak briefed Cabinet on imminent military intervention this evening. Sir Keir Starmer, Labour leader, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the Commons Speaker, have also been briefed. Rishi Sunak had to dispense with the usual convention, says Stephen Swinford, of informing Parliament of the military intervention because the airstrikes are expected within hours. And of course, he doesn't have to inform Parliament, we know that. In lieu of consulting Parliament, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the Commons Speaker, and the opposition have been briefed. So that is confirmation, as Stephen Swinford, the Times' political editor, is hearing, that there will be airstrikes on Houthi military positions by the US, Britain joining them, and that'll happen tonight. Roger, let's get your response to that, please.
Yes, it does look that way. The question is really, in these kind of actions, is when you stop. And I suppose at the beginning it will be a limited strike against missile launchers and perhaps against some Houthi naval positions. But then what? Yeah, this is one of the issues with the Libyan intervention was that it spread. Yeah, that's to say that it wasn't a clearly defined mission. Was the point to get rid of Gaddafi or not? And this. I think they'll want to make this a very closely defined mission, and they will want to pause, and they will want to see what happens next. I don't think anyone really expects Iran to reply with force in the Red Sea. I think that Iran might use one of its other militias or one of the other tentacles of this octopus that it's got to make trouble, to distract. And I think that's what we have to wait for. It could be something like that. But the big apocalyptic outcome of this is that Iran may actually be able to launch some kind of nuclear, it's on the road to nuclear power. Maybe it's done something, maybe it can launch some kind of dirty bomb or something like this. But it doesn't look to me that that's what Iran would want to do. I think Iran will want to dial this down.
The UK and United States, are we here preparing to launch military strikes against Houthi rebels in Yemen? Rishi Sunak holding a full cabinet call as we speak. Sky News reporting at the moment that the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer and the Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey will be briefed by the government shortly after their cabinet meeting is over. Evening Standard Defence editor Robert Fox spoke to me at the start of the show. Let's listen to this first and then pick up the conversation. This is Robert Fox on what the next move might be from the UK.
Well, what's been before the Prime Minister for some time now is whether they might have to strike the land bases of the Houthis whence they are launching the drones. This has been under consideration, I can reveal now, since before Christmas. And they've even talked about the contingency at some time of sending one of the British aircraft carriers with a small flight of aircraft, but also with a contingent of Marines and ground troops, because they cannot afford to allow this attritional fight against maritime commercial shipping to go on for weeks and months more.
We had Robert Fox there, sort of, talking about, trying to nip it in the bud. I just wonder whether that's an option, whether that's too far in the future, Roger. And we talk about now what the next step is. It has to be done on a step-by-step basis, really.
Yes, that's right. I mean, it's going to be an American-led operation. That's quite clear. So what the cabinet decides and what Cobra decides and what the others decide now are conditional, really, on how far America is willing to go and how much support it can give to a land attack on Houthi bases, which seems to me quite feasible and is within the logic of protecting maritime sea traffic, protecting world trade. It's and has the support of the region, as Saudi Arabia has already given the tip to both Britain and the United States that they want this to happen.
And there's been already kind of a coalition of 10 countries all issuing a statement last week condemning what's been happening, what the Houthi rebels have been doing in the Red Sea. Robert Fox also saying that he feels, France would, if we're, talking about action, about taking action on Yemen-based launch pads effectively. So from where Houthi rebels are launching their drones and their missiles, that France would be a part of that action pretty soon. What happens then? I don't know if I'm running ahead of myself a little bit here, but if the next stage is let's target the bases that the Houthi rebels are using in Yemen to strike at ships in the Red Sea, what happens if the Houthis completely ignore that? Roger?
Well, that's the key question, whether it will then escalate into, and well, there are two questions. One is, what will Iran do? Will it try and push the Houthis into some kind of restraint, and will they then fold? And the other is, at what stage do you need full UN backing to start doing this kind of thing? There is a perfectly plausible case that can be made to the international community at large, which is, of course, that this is becoming a real Houthi attacks. 27 in all so far, are becoming a real problem to world trade, to global trade, and therefore there is an absolutely plausible case to intervene, a stronger case even than there was to go into Libya all those years ago.
That's right. We know that a Treasury assessment warned before Christmas that disruption to shipping could shrink the British economy by as much as 0.3%, but the ramification for global shipping overall is around 12 to 15% has been warned. So there is, of course, justification there to do something about this. Helen, from your perspective, I mean, what we're talking about here is, yes, we'd need to get UN, we need to get backing for this. We need to make sure that we're protected, that we're on the right side of international law, etc. But these conversations, involving, Houthi rebels, Yemen, of course, the fact that they're heavily associated with Iran as well. What do those conversations stir in you? Does this bring about a concern, do you think, that we could be heading into, some serious conflict here?
Of course. I mean, the situation and the region feels so hot. The real anxiety is that any intervention is the spark that sets alight a kind of geopolitical bushfire. This isn't happening in isolation. It's, of course, intensification or escalation of what's happening in Gaza, with Iran, in both cases, a kind of shadow player. And I think, the United States has been very nervous about their response because they know the stakes are so high about the consequences, as Roger was saying. And, obviously tonight, the situation has reached a kind of boiling point. And the decisions are very difficult, aren't they? Because, as you were saying, the economic implications are significant. There's a risk to action and there's a risk to inaction. In some ways it feels similar to the Ukraine conflict. We're not able to be independent of these things. We are all, linked now, and
but
what's
it's interesting,
going on
isn't
there.
it? Because with Ukraine, there was an invasion. It took many people by surprise. We had to act quickly. We gave our full support, and there was a big drive. No question really about whether or not we would support and what the support would look like. We were all in from the very beginning, to kind of simplify it. In this case, we're having to make strategic decisions, aren't we? And I wonder if you're confident in what you know and what you've heard so far from Rishi Sunak and Grant Shapps, that the UK will make the right decision on this, because they are having to be strategic. They aren't being forced into a position. Their hand has been forced to a certain extent, but they have got some stake in this. How do you think they're handling it so far? Do you think the warnings have been enough from Grant Shapps, and would you understand then if the response was accelerated?
Yeah, I mean, the warnings so far have had no effect at all. So I think, that's a strategy that's been played out the last couple of months, have been ineffective. But it is interesting, we've had such a quick change of prime ministers, but Boris Johnson was very much suited to that kind of very clear moral crusade as he saw it in Ukraine. And perhaps, Rishi Sunak is more temperamentally suited to this, because it is really,
because
as
it's
you
more
say,
about diplomacy,
much more,
maybe. Yeah. Although Johnson was very good on the foreign stage. So, I mean, if you're going into battle, you'd want Boris Johnson leading you, wouldn't you? You'd want him motivating everyone, telling you that this is the right thing to do. I'm not sure you're going to get that from Rishi Sunak, but maybe in this instance, we need something cool and calm, statesmanlike.
Exactly, because I think what they're trying to do is keep this as localized and as targeted as they possibly can. So it's not the kind of blunderbuss approach that perhaps Johnson would have adopted.
Roger, let's come back to you. The role of Iran in all this, as you said earlier, Iran could push the Houthis to restrain. And actually, we've been talking on this show about what's been happening in the Red Sea for a number of weeks, since before Christmas. Actually, we've been talking about that particular area. We've done an awful lot of coverage on it. And when we've talked about Iran's appetite, also through Hezbollah as well, but when we've talked to experts about Iran's appetite for accelerated tensions with the West, to go to war with the West in the most serious sense of it, many people have said to us, Iran don't have that appetite. Iran don't want to go to war with the West. Is that still the case, do you think?
Well, I know the Israelis talk about the octopus, the 8 tentacles that Iran deploys in different measures. So, Shiite militias in Iraq or
the axis of
Revolutionary
resistance.
Guards.
Is it?
Yeah, which stretches quite far, and which gives them this kind of flexibility to some degree of being able to switch from one particular irritant to another. Now they've settled on the Houthis because it has the biggest global impact of all of their different tentacles. It can't just be written off in the way that Iranian-backed militias in Iraq can be pushed onto one side. This is something that is becoming a major disruptor of global trade. People, all of the world's trade, or almost all of the world's trade, is having to go around the Cape of Good Hope. That's a big disruption. It's not bringing anyone to their knees, but it's pushing up prices, pushing up inflation, and creating a sense of uncertainty. So there is. So the Houthis, in other words, have taken the lead position in all of this.
Yeah, Roger.
And that's an Iranian choice.
Yeah,
but the Houthis do have some say in all of this. It's not that they're a complete puppet, and they've got the smell of gunpowder in their nostrils, so to speak.
Yeah.
They think they're really about to transform the situation. And that's what the Saudis have been warning Britain and the United States quite thoroughly. I mean,
Yeah.
Blinken in particular, when he was
Well, he was there a few
in the
days
Middle
ago,
East.
wasn't he? Look, I've got a bit of a breaking line here from Stephen Swinford, the Times' political editor, who's given an update on that cabinet briefing this evening. And Stephen Swinford says Britain expected to join US in carrying airstrikes out on Houthi military positions in Yemen tonight, says Stephen Swinford. Rishi Sunak briefed cabinet on imminent military intervention this evening. Sir Keir Starmer, Labour leader, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the Commons Speaker, have also been briefed. Rishi Sunak had to dispense with the usual convention, says Stephen Swinford, of informing Parliament of the military intervention because the airstrikes are expected within hours. And of course, he doesn't have to inform Parliament, we know that. In lieu of consulting Parliament, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the Commons Speaker, and the opposition have been briefed. So that is confirmation, as Stephen Swinford, the Times' political editor, is hearing, that there will be airstrikes on Houthi military positions by the US, Britain joining them, and that'll happen tonight. Roger, let's get your response to that, please.
Yes, it does look that way. The question is really, in these kind of actions, is when you stop. And I suppose at the beginning it will be a limited strike against missile launchers and perhaps against some Houthi naval positions. Then what? Yeah, this is one of the issues with the Libyan intervention was that it spread. Yeah, that's to say that it wasn't a clearly defined mission. Was the point to get rid of Gaddafi or not? And this. I think they'll want to make this a very closely defined mission, and they will want to pause, and then want to see what happens next. I don't think anyone really expects Iran to reply with force in the Red Sea. I think that Iran might use one of its other militias or one of its other tentacles of this octopus that it's got to make trouble, to distract. And I think that's what we have to wait for. It could be something like that. But the big apocalyptic outcome of this is that Iran may actually be able to launch some kind of nuclear, it's on the road to nuclear power. Maybe it's done something, maybe it can launch some kind of dirty bomb or something like this. But it doesn't look to me that that's what Iran would want to do. I think Iran will want to dial this down.
Okay, so you're feeling Iran will want to dial this down. Just to repeat that line from Stephen Swinford this evening, that Britain is expected to join the US in carrying airstrikes out on Houthi military positions in Yemen. So those are the launch pads, effectively, we've been talking about, where those strikes originate from, where the drones are launched from, where the missiles are launched from. Those military positions in Yemen are going to be the subject of airstrikes by Britain and the US this evening. That's what Stephen Swinford is reporting. And Rishi Sunak dispensed with the usual convention of informing Parliament. Instead, as Lindsay Hoyle, the Commons Speaker, has been briefed, the opposition has been briefed as well to allow that all to go ahead at speed.